I don't, in my wildest dreams, think that you can know everything about the child already as you come into this process. So having those questions was important. But if you can't answer some of those questions, there is absolutely no reason why you wouldn't use any formal or informal tests in your field that you are comfortable with. So if you don't know a child's receptive language, for instance, and you're the SLP and the classroom teacher, and well, you can go and complete whatever test you usually use to look at receptive language. The same is true if you don't know how the child's handwriting compares to typically developing children of that age. You can use whatever tool you might normally use to do that. So it isn't limited to the student information guide, but rather it would show you some areas where you need some more information. And that's our whole goal, is to get all that information we need. I wanted to share just a couple other free assessment tools that I think are delightful. And so I'm going to just quickly name those. One is a school-based AT writing evaluation, and it's from the Colorado Department of Education, their SWAC website. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. I just love it. It starts with having you do a copy test and then writing from dictation and then typing from dictation. It helps you compare this child's handwriting to what you might expect of typically developing children. And I just find it a really great starting place for doing an AT evaluation that looks at handwriting. Another tool that I didn't include, but that you can go to, is the communication matrix. And it used to be free. I used to include more information about it. It now has a small fee, but it's still a wonderful tool if you are really dealing with a child whose communication is at the very beginning level and you're wanting to get some ideas of what you're looking at and where you might go. Another one is the PAR, the Protocol for Assessment and Reading. I hope you know the UPAR from Don Johnston, and the wonderful tool that helps you look at all your students in your class and what kind of information they gather when they read to themselves, or they're read to by an adult, or they hear text read through a computer. But this is a free tool if you don't have access to UPAR in your district and you want to look at that for just one student. This is a good place to start. And then the Writing with All Tools Continuum from Jane Farrell is the other thing I wanted to refer you to. Another thing that I really love, and it's really helpful if you have a child who's just really beginning to scribble, make a few letters, starting to group those letters. It gives you a nice sense of how that writing develops, and helps you think about if there's a tool that might be helpful at that point. So those are just some additional free things that I thought maybe you wouldn't know about and would be valuable. When we figured out what we know about the students' strengths and abilities and their needs, we then need to look at the environment they're in. Where do they have the problems that we're concerned about? If it's communicating in some way, if it's producing written materials, if it's doing math problems, if it's managing and organizing their papers and their information, where are the problems? And we need to look at all relevant environments that we can. And in those environments, we really want to drill down and start looking at what's available now and what are the other students doing. You know, does a student currently use something as assistive technology? Is having the Chromebook that's available been a wonderful thing for this child and has changed their quality and quantity of their written work? That may be assistive technology for that child, and they've already discovered that for us. What modifications are typically made? I'm just look at what's going on. And of course, looking also at where is the student located in the room? Where are the things they need to see? Are they in the right position? How's the lighting, the sound? Are transitions a concern? Getting a general sense of what's going on for this student. I know as a service provider, you often have to run in and do just your work with the student, and you don't have the luxury of sitting back and doing an observation. So if you make it a specific part of your service, at least this one time, it can be helpful. I wanted to read to you something from a wonderful OT who's also an AT specialist in Rhode Island, Faith Paradise. And this is what she says about observation. Prior to reading any reports on the student, I do an initial observation on the student's daily setting, in the area identified as being a concern. So if that's the lunchroom, if that's language arts time, whatever it is, then I observe how the student responds to teacher direction, manages time, accomplishes tasks, etc. Then I look at how he is keeping up with peers in quantity and quality with blind samples from that day. After the initial visit, I have a better idea of what to probe. So the next WADI handout is handout number 6 for you, and it's called the Classroom Observation Guide, and it covers those very things. So you're looking at what is the task, how are the directions given, first of all, and what are the other students doing? Have they all gotten their paper and gotten started on it while our student is madly digging through his desk trying to find a clean piece of paper that isn't wrinkled, or is he trying to find the place in the textbook and it takes him 15 minutes of time that other students have actually gotten the task done? And what's happening? What are the barriers you might see right then and there? And what solutions do you think? You might say to that kid who can never find the place in the textbook, let's just put some sticky tabs on the first page of each chapter and help him start finding those. So when I'm observing, I need to note those down right then. I've always had a little bit of a problem with memory. So if I don't document it when I do it, I tend to forget it. And then what questions do you have? So this is an important tool for using when you're looking at this student and gathering information about what's going on in their environment. And then one last look at those tasks before we start thinking about tools. We might have had a general task area when we started this process on that first or second page of the student information guide. But now that we've observed, now that we've seen what's going on in the environment, maybe we've narrowed that down and really homed in on something that's critical. Sometimes we have a student who already has AT, and we're looking at, do we need a different AT? Do we need something else? I want to say to you that often that's the wrong question, because we often blame the assistive technology and think we need a different tool, when what we really need is to change the task slightly. And I want to share with you now another quote from, that's just a favorite of mine. And this is from Erin Sheldon, who is the mother of 2 children with disabilities and who has immersed herself in the area of assistive technology and AAC over the years and become a wonderful expert. If you ever get to hear her, I know you'll benefit from it. But I love this comment from her. She said, teachers often think of AAC like it's kale. Kale is a good idea in theory, but not part of their daily diet and not something their students will get excited about. They don't plan for kale at every meal. They just give themselves kudos on the special occasion they eat it. And she goes on to say that we really need to make AAC feel irresistible, more like chocolate. Students in general can't resist complaining, exclaiming, asking questions, expressing opinions, or telling stories. Kids need AAC that's hard to resist because it gives them access to irresistible things to communicate about. Teachers need AAC that is hard to resist because it supports learning, engagement, and interaction in the classroom. So we want to think about how are we using that AT? What tasks are we asking that student to do? And maybe we don't need new AT. Maybe we just need to make our tasks a little more like chocolate and less like kale. So we're now going to start talking about tools. That one thing that we probably came in here thinking we would talk about first. And we need to think about what's available in general. And I want us to think about now about, well, how can I find that out? Where can I start and how do I choose? So I see that Kathy's responding to a question about the forms on the website. The WADI forms are on the WADI website. I just want to say, and I haven't looked at the DPI website to see which forms they have there, but I really did want you to have the 2017 version. And so that's what Kathy is sharing that I had sent to her. They are on the WADI website, and if someone wants to check DPI and see if that's the same ones. But please don't use the old ones, particularly from all the way back in 2004. We've made a lot of important changes since then. So one of the things you can use is in handout number 7. It's called the WADI AT Continuums. And we originally called this the AT checklist. And we just had all on one piece of paper, front and back, continuums for all those different areas that we've talked about and kinds of tasks. The reason we want this, and the reason I think it's so important, is not to jump immediately to the most expensive, complex, hard to manage and hard to maintain kind of tool. Often there are small, inexpensive, handy little things that can make a significant difference for a student. It may not be where we stay forever. We may move on to something that's technology based, but we all know that our technology can fail for us. And so we also need to know what non-tech things work and help this student move forward. So you'll see in every category for every kind of task, we've started with the simplest and moved to the most complex. And of course, that doesn't mean you should take 6 months doing each one and have it be years before we make a decision. That's not the point. The point is to think about, do we have these low-tech things available? Have they made a difference? If so, can we tell how? Because that information will help us move to something more complex also that has those same features or characteristics. So that's a good place to start, to have a good discussion with families about what we might want to try and why, and what's worked and what hasn't worked. The next place I would recommend that you look, I'm back to the AT Internet modules from Ocali. And if you haven't looked at these, there are 39 modules based on the WADI forms that were written by Wisconsin folks in developing these AT Internet modules. And so most of them have 2 parts. Math would have part 1 and part 2, where we look at the general information, and then we look at some specific tools. Communication was a little more complex. We've got 3 parts to communication, but they are a wonderful resource. We did this in about 2016 and 17, so they're not very old, and they do include the kind of information we still want to look at. So let me show you an example. This is from the ATM module on motor aspects of writing. So we might be looking at the students' abilities and difficulties and think about their strengths as well as their challenges. Look at the environmental considerations. Again, look at those tasks and see if we want to narrow it down. Is there one that we want to start with that's the most problematic for this student and would give him a boost if he could get it done more easily before we move on to other tasks? And so that's a good place to look. So we're really moving into now, as we start thinking about these things, we're analyzing the information. So we gathered information about the student and the environment and the task. We have to put that together now so that we can begin to make a decision. One of the ways we do that in assistive technology is something we call feature match. And it's also one of the things I think people can find to be the most off-putting, because what in the world is feature match? I probably can't do that. That sounds really complex. So let's talk about how we simplify that. And then I want to show you another really terrific resource. So what we're looking at are really descriptors or characteristics. Those are what lead to features. So what we want to know when we look at the child is what kinds of things do they need in this magical AT that we're going to come up with. So if we have a young child who needs support for verbal communication, what do we need them to have? In this case, the team decided they needed something that was small and portable, because this is a mobile child who walks around and they need to be able to take it with them. They needed it to be sturdy with some kind of a case, because it's a child who sometimes drops it when they're being mobile and walking around their environment. They knew they needed picture support, and they talked about the fact that, well, video would be nice for some things, especially when it's an action or something, because the student likes to look at videos and they think that would draw their attention. They think for the future, they probably need an on-screen keyboard. And then they want to look at, do we need it to be a full-featured communication option? Or are we going to use it for other things too? The most important thing they decided was it has to be easy to use. So they underlined that. That was an important description. And then they wanted to be able to add some schedules of task boards, and they wanted to have a way for data collection. So they then went back and looked at the kinds of things they'd been talking about and marked, do they have that feature that we need? So this is an important discussion for us. And sometimes it's where we get bogged down with a team who's fairly new, or particularly if it's a family where we don't have the best collaborative working relationship yet. And so I want to direct you back to Ocali. This is not part of the AT Internet modules. It's separate. It's called SIFS, and it's a web-based tool. And information you put on the website is absolutely secure. It's something you can safely use. It helps you ask questions again to identify the student's needs. And then the answers to those questions really create for you a student profile. And you can save the results for future use. It does not name a specific tool, but it helps you generate a list of potential features. And they believe that that helps the team then when they go to talk to vendors or Google products or look for specific things, they know the kinds of things they're looking for. And they feel that it really helps you develop sort of your terminology and your thinking. It can really be a wonderful resource for you to work together with families on. I had the chance to talk to Jan Rogers, who's the program director for the AT and AEM Center at Ocali. And she said their results have been really wonderful from SIFS. They get terrific feedback from school districts, from intermediate units like your CISA, from folks who are learning to do assistive technology assessments. And they found that it results in more effective discussions about needed features. It provides vocabulary to help you have a discussion with vendors. It's really useful in training others if you need to train some folks in your school about assistive technology as you learn this process. It leads to more confidence and independence. And they have found that parents who use it really find it helpful in jumpstarting conversations. And it means that those parents come to the table talking about features instead of requesting a brand name of a device that they've heard about. So I would urge you to take a look at SIFS if you haven't used it and see if it can be helpful to you.